All right. Good morning. I have sound effects. Thank you. Well, I do have to chime in and thank Jeff for doing this. It is a very interesting time in education, and there are a lot of conferences, a lot of vibrant conversation going on, and I don't speak at a lot of them, but for Jeff, definitely get out of the trenches, come out and talk a little bit about what I and the people I work with have been doing. First of all, I want to thank all of the educators that are here for their service. I know there are a lot in the room. My son is here, just finishing a 2-year stint in the Delta region of Mississippi. Troy, you out there? For Teach for America. And it's very clear from my experience in sitting in classrooms, working with educators for over 15 years now, that there are a lot of much easier jobs than being a teacher. And it's particularly challenging today. And while we will thank our service members who risk their lives abroad, we forget to thank teachers. So I'm saying thank you. Yeah. So how did I get involved in education? Well, it's very simple. I have been in the tech industry. I have my own education experiences. I did well. I wanted to focus on philanthropy. I did a simple thing one time, and that was someone launched a program to buy laptops. I think this was about 16 years ago for underprivileged kids going to college. So I bought 100 laptops. 2 years later, they brought those kids back and had a party, and those kids were coming up and hugging me. And I actually saw, wow, I can make a difference. But you know what? Writing a check is a cheap way to make a difference. If you really want to make a difference, you have to work hard at it. I moved to California, and you know, California is a very innovative state. Yes, that's right. Money isn't the answer. Work is. California is a very innovative state. And California actually innovated the demise of our education system. There was a time where California was a shining beacon and a bright light. And now, by any measure that we use, is number 48 or 49, which is a travesty. And so I decided I wanted to try and do something about it. What I did was, together with some friends, we activated our community and we decided we wanted to build a school in Napa. We thought about a charter, decided, actually, we're tech people and we don't want to be attached to bureaucracy. We looked at various pedagogies. We settled on what Chris was talking about, progressive education, and we built a K-8 school. I will tell you, having been involved in the growth of AOL and the internet and many startups, nothing is harder than trying to make progress in education. However, that is a thriving school today in a community, not a rich kid's school. But a school that serves many demographics, and I learned a heck of a lot from that. I learned that it really takes a community to build a school. I learned that, guess what? We have a head of school that doesn't report to a superintendent of education, who reports to a county superintendent, who reports to middle-level management in a state, and guess what? They do fine without all that help. And the community can manage its own standards and decide what it wants to happen. But I also learned that people of means going off and starting schools doesn't really help our education system. In fact, it hurts our public education system. So I switched gears and got involved in a very early movement that was going on in Napa to try and reimagine what a high school was. And this was very simple. It was local activism. It was businesses going to the district and saying, You're graduating kids from high school that can't use computers, they don't have skills relevant to the workforce, and we can't attract business here. You need to do something about it. So to do something about it wasn't just a computer lab, it was a wholesale reimagination of what a high school could be, and that was New Tech #1. Started about 15 years ago now, and now a nationwide network of schools. This September will be up to 86, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we took that local activism, that local reimagination of what a school could be, and have replicated it throughout the country. All of this has been very hard. I mean, I'm happy to be talking today because there's actually people who want to talk about education today. 15 years ago and 10 years ago and even 5 years ago, nobody really wanted to talk about what was going on. Now, since we've had a movie, Waiting for Superman, and we have a president who's very interested in education, there's a lot of talking going on. There's also a lot of shouting going on and finger pointing. I mean, you know, I wish we had gotten Diane Ravitch here. I don't know if anyone follows her. She is a very active tweeter. I agree with probably about 85% of what she says. But everything she says is shouting. And the reason she's shouting is because someone's shouting back at her. We have too much shouting going on in education and too much finger pointing. It's bad teachers, it's testing, it's this. And I just want to roll through some very important issues and what I see, what my observations are about them, and get them out of the way. First of all, let's talk about the landscape. It's great to dream, and I think it's very important to think about what education can be, but we also have to be grounded by what do we have and what are we dealing with today. We have 98,000, almost 100,000 public schools in our country. We have 33,000 private schools, 80% of which are parochial schools. Represents about 20% of the student population. 5,000 of the public schools are charter schools. 28,000 of the public schools are high schools. So that's 28,000 high schools. And as I said, we're about to have 86 New Tech Network high schools. That's a tiny little number, even though we feel like we've had a major accomplishment. Of those 28,000 high schools, 3,000 of them are considered by the government to be dropout factories. Our most troubled schools in our most difficult and challenging areas of the country, mostly urban. So we're dealing with big numbers here. So what are some of the takeaways from meandering around for the last 15 years in this environment, scratching your head and trying to say, how do we make this better? And after banging your head against the wall to prevent your brain from leaking out of your ears, what kind of conclusions do you come to? First of all, I think my biggest one is we do not have one education problem or issue in this country. We have three. And they run along demographic lines. So start with the top, those private schools, the people who have left the system. 20% of the population. They're not all going to very wealthy private independent schools. They're mostly parochial schools. But those people are out. They are paying voluntary taxes. They have said, I don't want to participate in these schools. I will use my own money and try and give my kid the very best. And therefore, they don't really care too much about what's going on in public education. The wealthiest segment of that group is particularly hurtful because they have the money and political clout to try and do something. They are out of the system. But there is plenty to learn from these schools. Because, as I said, these schools are not part of the bureaucracy. They generally perform well. They set their own standards. They set their own management. They manage themselves. And they do just fine. And the outcomes are generally very good. Now I'm going to go to number 3 problem, which is actually the biggest problem, and that's the most distressed, troubled schools. The school that Troy was at in Mississippi, a failing school, middle school. 3,000 schools that are in troubled areas that are churning out dropouts, and the middle schools that feed them. We know by the time the kids are in middle school, they're not going to make it through. This is a very big problem for our country. We're not graduating kids. I don't have to, you all know the numbers behind this. The issue is that this problem, which is a huge embarrassment and real problem for our country, is driving policy for all the rest of education. So much focus on resources that go into solving this problem. And by the way, a worthy problem that must be solved, but I can tell you it's bigger than education. It is the poverty associated with the economics, it's the urban and rural environments, it's the economic development. I mean, it's awesome that we can paratroop in, Teach for America, teachers and build KIPP schools and try and raise these kids' scores. But guess what? There's no jobs for them. And so ultimately, we can raise their scores, but I'm not convinced that we're really solving the whole problem. And then I think the silent problem is the middle. It's those, 20,000-ish something schools, the middle class, the overtaxed, the whatever, that is not being enhanced into 21st century skills, that we are not putting the resources in to get these kids to have the best, to innovate in education. And so as people who want to try and solve one of these problems, I think it's very important to pick where you want to work. Because the problem you're going to solve in distressed areas and what you're going to have to do it may be and likely be very different than trying to bring innovation to the middle, or how you might do innovation in the distressed areas is going to have a different flavor. Second lesson, we talk about teachers and teaching. I like to talk about learning. KnowledgeWorks, where I'm a director, New Tech Network, we like to talk about learning. Why? Because we believe this is about our children. We get lost in the policy and everything else, but in the end, we do about our kids, and it's something we should never, ever lose sight about. Lesson number 3, teachers. I love them to death. They are heroes. Every one of you here who's a teacher is a hero. The fact that you're here is a hero. It is a difficult time for teachers with layoffs. It's a difficult time with politics associated with the union. The vast majority of teachers I've met are brilliant, dedicated people. Doesn't mean that there aren't ones that aren't so good. There's no profession where everyone's perfect. There are crappy doctors. There are lots of crappy executives in tech. The idea that teachers don't want to be evaluated, wouldn't be evaluated, that they shouldn't have ongoing training are just crazy. And I think most teachers, given the opportunity to in an environment where they can evolve their professional skills and do better, will. And the ones that don't, we need to figure out how to counsel them into different careers. Next subject, parents. Parents have to be engaged. Again, I don't have to tell all of you this. We know it's the single biggest influence in the success of a child, but today parents are busy and they believe that their job is done when they drop the kid off at school. You take care of the discipline, you take care of the after-school care. Without engaged parents, without us trying to figure out how do we bring what parents are forced to do in independent schools for them to survive to public education, we're not going to be able to advance the state of play. And now I'm going to step in a big one. And by the way, I expect to make people angry. You can't do anything in education without getting people angry. Testing. This is a hot one. You hear so much about it. To me, this is very simple. Testing is a very important diagnostic tool. In progressive education, we don't even do it until kids are in middle school because you have to. By the way, the kids do fine. But if you are teaching to a test, if the tail is wagging the dog, what you are doing is now giving our kids what I call educational emphysema. You're not diagnosing anymore, you are giving them a disease. And the disease sucks the air out of the system, because by forcing schools to teach to a test to get an outcome, and by the way, doing a bad job because we don't test for the right things, we don't do comparative testing, but making that the it, which is where we are today, is really insanity and something that needs to be fixed. We do have to look at what are our appropriate diagnostic tools. Today we test not to win, but we're testing not to fail. So we are testing kids for the most basic reading and math skills and assuming that's the measure of what all of education should be. That might be appropriate in the failing schools as a starting step, in the troubled schools as an important diagnostic. But in the other segments I've talked about, testing may need to look very different. And there are groups working on it, but it's something we have to work on very quickly. Data, another one of my favorite topics. If you're waiting for Superman, data is the kryptonite. Data is always in the eye of the beholder. And data is used as a weapon to prevent innovation, to advance agendas. Data is important, and we need to learn from data, but we cannot use it as political tools. And we need to be upfront about data and make sure we're not obfuscating one fact or another. And before I talk about what I think we ought to do about all this, I want to address my last observation, and that's my tech friends, my Silicon Valley friends. There's a lot of buzz right now about education, the idea that it's the next social media, it's the next gold rush, it's the next place to innovate and make a lot of money. I'm old enough to tell you that when the Apple II computer came out in 1980 or whenever it was, maybe before then, there was a boom in the idea that computers were going to revolutionize education. Never happened. And there were a lot of companies that were started to go chase technology in the classroom. Never happened. You want to know why? It's very simple. Education is not a market. It doesn't behave like a market. Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley investors, which I am one of, we invest in hypergrowth. We want companies that are going to be like Twitter, that, in the course of a few years are going to explode and have impact. That's not how education works. I wish it worked that way, maybe a moderated version of it, but it doesn't work that way. We could dream that it might work that way. It's not going to work that way for the foreseeable future. So there needs to be a little bit of recalibration here. I welcome all of this innovation. I think it's incredibly important. But the idea that you're going to invent an app and all of a sudden that magic bullet is going to help those kids in Mississippi, it's not happening. And for a variety of reasons, first of which is that the system is not capable of dealing with all this technological shit against the wall. When you go to schools, there aren't IT managers in districts that can do what IT managers in the corporate world do, and that is evaluate different programs, decide what works, get them installed, make sure they work with fidelity and good results, and make adjustments. The school system doesn't have that yet. Maybe it will someday. Now, there are tons of innovative teachers out there. I love on Twitter when you see, I'm sure many of you are here, that are out there looking at those things, bringing them into the classroom where they can. That is awesome. But to the people who want to innovate in this space, you have to change your thinking to be like a teacher. You're doing it as an avocation, and you're doing it for good. If you can figure out how to make some money at it along the way, great. But if you think you're going to be the next Zuckerberg and billionaire in education and so on, I'd never say never, because in tech, weird things happen, but that is not why you should be pursuing innovation. You should be pursuing it because of the passion and for doing it well, for the good of our community. So, those are my rants, and I just needed to get them off of my chest because it helps frame some of the way we think about how do you go ahead and succeed, because at New Tech Network, which is part of KnowledgeWorks, a foundation that is not a check-writing foundation, but one where we roll up our sleeves, even if they don't have funny paisleys on them, and we go out and activate communities. We help them innovate and make change. We have been very grassroots. Many of you probably have never heard about it. Go, search New Tech Network and knowledgeworks.org, and you can see what we've been doing. Because the fact is, we have not been talking, we've been doing. We think talk is cheap. We think that where the rubber hits the road is getting out there, working with educators, working with districts, listening and learning and trying to figure out how do we enable and activate those communities to work on their own. How do we do what has happened in the Napa community where, and by the way, just so you know, I'll give you a little perspective. The city of Napa is not a wealthy area. It is very blue-collar, agricultural. It is very high Latino. It looks like rural, high-percentage free lunch areas. This is a very challenged school district. And combines some of the problems of urban, has gangs, some of the rural problems. It almost is a perfect incubator to try and make change, but it has a very engaged community that has demanded change and gone after it. So what we did there was to figure out we could rise up, we could rally, we could raise money, and we could create a school. Shaky start, like all schools, the first New Tech school. Bill Gates came along 10 years ago or so when he was doing his replication project, said, hey, if you could do that, we'll give you some money to do it 10 more times. We created a foundation. We went and started figuring out how to replicate them. We did. It was hard to do, but we developed the tools and technologies. The way a New Tech school works is it is project and problem-based learning. No walls. These are classrooms. It's an entirely collaborative environment. It looks like a workplace. The teachers, a big part of what we do is there's a holistic software platform that is social, that connects the kids, the parents, the teachers, that manages the projects, that gives them a portfolio that goes through their entire high school career. Now the platform is doing assessment as well, but the single most important thing we do is professional development and coaching. And the reason why we've been successful in these small size 500 student schools is that it isn't piecemeal, it's not throwing tech shit against the wall, it's not expecting some things are going to bubble up from the bottom. It is an activated community and teachers, and these are regular public schools with unions, no charters, no anything. Everyone plays together to get it done. But without all of those pieces of the puzzle, it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't work with fidelity. And by enhancing all of those pieces of the puzzle, we recently did a training for our 2012 track. I think over 1,000 people were there. And we're on track for over 100 schools in 2012. Those are being done community by community. Now what's happening is that states are waking up and saying, wait a minute, we have 5 or 6 of these here, and they're working. They're producing good results. We will be making an announcement later this month of the scores and how and how they measure, at least on the standards that are out there. They're very good, but the fact is states are saying we want to do more of that, and so we are engaging with the states to figure out how to scale and how to make this bigger. How do we do it? It's not going to be top down. It's not going to be because the federal government mandates or gives grants or whatever. It's because we will activate communities to make it happen. And new tech isn't the only way to do this. There are many ways to do this. And so my parting message to everybody here is, what can you do? How do you help? Well, first of all, I think it comes down to accepting that education is an inherently local issue. The kind of education that Chris is doing in Philadelphia is completely different than what Troy did in Mississippi and what we do in Napa or Maynard, Texas, or Ohio. And those kids are, somebody's parent has those kids in that neighborhood, and they have their own unique needs. So look to your community. Look to activate your community. Your community needs leadership, and that can be a teacher, that can be parents, it can be, actually, ultimately, you have to create a collaboration between all of them. So start local. We need all of this to happen virally. Get together with people who want to affect change. And I say start with the teachers. You have no credibility in trying to change education if you don't get in the classroom and sit there and talk to teachers and see what's going on. If you think you can be an outsider and say, oh, well, why aren't you doing this and that? Doesn't work. Get with the teachers, get in the classroom, then go talk to the administrators. Then go to your board in your district and talk about what are the things you could do to affect change. Almost every community, or 30% of schools, already have a community foundation attached to them. If you don't, figure out how to get one. $10 donations, $50, $500 donations add up. Now we have to use that money to go buy saxophones and clarinets and get music and drama back into the schools, but you can also use that money to affect innovation and do exciting programs. And go find organizations like KnowledgeWorks, New Tech Network. We have a group inside of KnowledgeWorks called Strive, which actually goes into communities at the very beginning to help them organize and activate and bring together all of the different constituencies to affect change. So I'm going to conclude by saying this is really hard, something I said earlier. I wish we could, wave a magic wand. I wish we could just keep looking for Superman or opening, telephone booths and hoping the answer just comes popping out. It won't. But I am optimistic, more optimistic than ever, that there are great models like New Tech, like KIPP schools. There are many options out there. How you get them into your community is up to you. So I'm pleading that everyone become a revolutionary. Everyone become an activist. Go in, demand change, find groups like KnowledgeWorks that will help you. The instant you raise your hand and say, we want to do something, we'll be there with the team to help. And the dreams that Jeff, the dreams that Chris are talking about, the dreams that we all have in our head of what education can be across all of the three issues we have to deal with can happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we done? Questions?
Okay. We have a couple minutes of questions. Stop the clock. Or no, just keep it going.
I tried to be on time. I'm out of breath. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Couple of minutes.
Could you be more specific about PD that you're talking about? I think all these great ideas are so rich, but the resistance is so deep.
Oh, yeah.
What is the PD that you're describing in coaching?
Yeah. So the largest part of what we do at New Tech Network is professional development. So what we do is train teachers how to teach inside of this new classroom where it is entirely different. It is not your old lesson plans. It is not a classroom with 30 kids sitting in front. It is project-based learning. There will be 60 kids together. There will be teachers paired up, science and math. They're going to launch a project. Let's go start a private rocket company. And you're going to teach physics and math through doing that project. Well, you know, how you teach in that environment, now the kids are going to break off into collaborative groups and they're going to manage their own project. You're going to be both a teacher, just in time, to get them this math and physics skills, but you're going to be a coach to manage them through that project. We, in professional development, teach the teachers how to do that. And it's not a you get taught and it's done. This is a vibrant, living, evolving environment, so there is coaching to support, and there's ongoing training every year to develop best practices in this methodology of teaching. And I don't believe that we can effect real dramatic change in the classroom without addressing, giving teachers the support to use all these tools that are out there that could change the way a classroom works.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.